not sure. I don't buy for a minute that he's going to prison without getting out of here somewhere and stashing $2 billion or whatever. I think he has that kind of power, meaning Sean himself. But remember, it goes a lot deeper than that.
So Diddy, after the Cassie lawsuit, gets hit with a bunch of lawsuits, and then ultimately the raids, and then...
It's official now. The bench's preliminary decision is not to place Sean Diddy Combs behind prison bars, but instead to commit him to a locked psychiatric facility this October. At first glance, that might seem like a lighter fate, an escape from the concrete grind of a penitentiary. But in truth, it cuts far deeper. For years, victims have cried out that he needed to be stopped, that the lawsuits, leaked footage, and accusations were only fragments of something darker. Now, instead of being labeled a criminal, he is branded unfit, stripped of the image he built on power, wealth, and control. To be declared a patient rather than a prisoner is not mercy, but humiliation. For Combs, this isn't leniency, it's obliteration.
Dishonest, violent, horrible. A promiscuous swinger who lied to and cheated on multiple partners. Incredibly, that's how Sean Diddy Combs' own lawyers described the billionaire music mogul, currently facing serious trafficking charges in a New York court.
Think about what this really means for the empire. Once Sean Diddy Combs is formally declared mentally unstable, he won't just lose his freedom. He'll lose control over the vast fortune he spent decades building. His companies, his music catalogs, his liquor brands, all the assets that secured him a seat at the billionaire table, will slip behind legal barriers. Sources are already whispering that trustees could liquidate pieces of his empire while he is sedated and monitored, with the proceeds funneled into accounts controlled by others. His children and inner circle are being sized up as the heirs to a fractured dynasty. While the public imagines cushioned furniture and therapy sessions, what's really being carved apart is the backbone of the Combs legacy. A man who once boasted that he couldn't be stopped is now on the brink of being silenced by paperwork and pills. Industry insiders have even started floating a chilling phrase: mental institution wealth transfer. It sounds like the title of a Netflix documentary, but the plot feels too convenient to dismiss. By steering him into a clinic instead of a prison, his family and closest business allies can sell the story as compassion, as protection from the harsher system. But what if the real goal is clearing away the last obstacle between them and a multi-billion-dollar pie? With Diddy incapacitated, signatures lose their power, decisions get made without him, and the empire carries on with new hands at the controls. If so, this wouldn't be a takedown by prosecutors or rivals. It would be the ultimate betrayal, engineered by the very people he trusted to stand with him until the end.
Maxwell, he wants all the Trump stuff to go, he wants all the Epstein stuff to go away, right? That's his main motivation, is he doesn't want his name mentioned with Epstein in the same sentence because that is hurting him and it's fracturing his party and his base. So he's nervous about it, but he could use Ghislaine as someone who says, I know everything there is to know about Jeffrey Epstein and you weren't part of anything bad, because she's the most credible person to say that.
The whispers turn darker when they drift into the Epstein shadow. At the very moment Diddy's fate is being sealed, Washington is tangled over how to handle the explosive Epstein files. President Trump has said he wants them released, though with the caveat that innocent names must be protected. He even admitted that people approached him about a possible pardon for Combs, only to shrug it off as complicated, given the rapper's past criticism of him. That strange dance, dangling clemency, then pulling it back, feels like theater. Which raises the question: what if this push to institutionalize Diddy isn't just about his fortune, but about silencing him before he can speak, before he connects dots that stretch directly into Epstein's notorious network?
And then what's the stuff that's happening with Wendy Williams? Do you think this is all connection too?
Of course.
The parallels are too sharp to dismiss. Epstein disappeared under the official narrative of a sudden death in a Manhattan cell. Diddy, instead of iron bars, will disappear behind the sealed doors of a psychiatric ward. Different settings, same pattern. A powerful man accused of exploiting women and young people, wrapped in luxury and tied to elite circles, suddenly removed from public view in a way that prevents a full, open courtroom reckoning. Just as conspiracy theorists never stopped dissecting the missing footage from Epstein's cell, they will not stop asking whether Combs has been sidelined to keep him from exposing secrets about the same A-list networks. The tension only deepens when we remember Maureen Comey, the prosecutor who touched both the Epstein and Combs cases, was abruptly fired without explanation. On her way out, she warned that fear is the tool of a tyrant, hinting at pressure from above. That dismissal set off alarms. If prosecutors were edging toward sunlight on both scandals and the Department of Justice pulled them off the board, what does that reveal about who is truly being shielded? The cover-up theory no longer feels like fringe speculation. It's starting to feel like the atmosphere in Washington itself, even if no one dares to say it on camera.
See this gangster that behind the scenes is that him? Or is that
Shout out to Wendy Williams.
Meanwhile, Diddy's legal troubles continue to multiply. He now faces Mann Act convictions, guilty of flying companions and hired performers across state lines for encounters arranged to satisfy his demands. Though acquitted of trafficking and racketeering, the guilty counts are enough to keep him tethered to the system. On top of that looms an avalanche of civil suits, over 100 reportedly waiting to be filed, spanning decades of alleged abuse involving both women and men, with some claims pointing to victims who were underage. The flood began when Cassie Ventura's case broke open the dam. Her lawsuit, backed by surveillance footage showing Diddy dragging her down a hotel hallway in 2016, gave the public a disturbing visual they could not ignore. Since then, accusations have stacked one after another, each darker than the last. Together, they paint the picture of a man whose private world spun out of control for years, hidden behind wealth and power until it could no longer be contained.
I don't trust nobody. In Hollywood, specifically, when you get there, a lot of people don't know how to say no. That's the difference between New York City and California.
And still, the way this sentencing is unfolding, it doesn't resemble justice in any traditional sense. It looks more like a carefully orchestrated disappearance. Civil suits can always be settled with money. Criminal charges can be negotiated down to lesser counts. But once a judge stamps you as mentally unfit, everything changes. You no longer testify. You don't publish a memoir. You don't sit in a courtroom and start naming names. You are medicated into compliance while the outside world rewrites your story for you. For that reason, many observers argue this outcome is far worse than prison. Prison would have been loud, public, undeniable. A psychiatric ward is hushed, hidden, its curtains drawn, with only whispers drifting through the halls. The timing feels almost theatrical. On one side, Trump and his Attorney General Pam Bondi stand before cameras declaring there is no Epstein client list, dismissing the obsession as baseless. On the other side, Diddy, once a fixture at elite parties and high society gatherings, is being locked away in a mental ward, effectively removing any chance he might confirm or deny the rumors linking him to those same circles. Coincidence or coordination? The puzzle pieces fit too neatly to ignore. Trump even admitted he was once very friendly with Diddy, but now finds a pardon difficult because of past hostility. It feels less like neutral justice and more like a mix of personal vendetta and political calculation. Meanwhile, the vultures of the culture industry circle overhead. Music catalogs of this size never sit untouched for long. If his fortune is frozen, expect catalog sales, streaming rights repackaged, and labels cutting deals. His name may be scrubbed, but the revenue streams will keep flowing. And if insiders are right about a looming wealth transfer scheme, Diddy's children and former partners could soon find themselves battling each other over the fractured remains of his empire.
People I don't think realized was he had cameras all over the place, unbeknownst to them. And now he has all that footage, supposedly. This is what I'm told. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens if, you're a huge iconic, TV star or movie star, and you're in some very...
Even Diddy's infamous freak-offs, once written off as tabloid fantasy, have now become courtroom evidence. Testimonies painted nights of relentless performance, filmed encounters, and the mogul treating participants as props in his personal productions. While the trial spotlighted just 4 women, whispers suggest the cameras captured far more, and with far bigger names present. So when prosecutors suddenly narrowed the scope, scrubbing out any mention of celebrities, was that really justice or quiet protection? Who benefits from Diddy being declared unstable and silenced before an unedited guest list could ever surface in a public courtroom?
I think when it came to, it's not just the more serious charges, but it's the more complex charges, where the jury, in order to, for instance, find guilt on the racketeering charge, was going to have to find not just that Sean Combs had kicked his girlfriend, had beat people up, had engaged in truly abhorrent behavior, but that he ran a criminal.
And in all of this, we can't overlook the staggering scale of what Diddy faces beyond the criminal court. Attorney Tony Bisbee estimates at least 120 lawsuits are in motion. That number is extraordinary, even in the scandal-saturated world of celebrity downfall. These aren't mere cash grabs. They span decades of alleged misconduct reaching back to the 90s. Some claims come from terrified teenagers, others from male employees. Still others describe entire parties staged like elaborate productions. Each new case adds weight, and every potential settlement chips away at his once massive fortune. Yet here lies the irony. If he is declared legally unfit, with his wealth already siphoned into guardianship structures, those lawsuits may end up fighting over scraps rather than billions. For a man who once boasted of being untouchable, who strutted on stage with the arrogance of immortality, the collapse doesn't come through a jury sentence but through a judge's signature declaring him incompetent. We've seen powerful men fall before, but rarely in this fashion. Not silenced by steel bars, but by medical jargon. Not through the roar of a public trial, but through the quiet handoff of his empire to others. As October approaches, the sense of theater grows, the feeling that we aren't witnessing justice, but a carefully managed vanishing act, designed to bury not just one man's sins, but secrets far larger than him.
Same thing for Jeffrey Epstein. Now, the interesting thing about the Epstein and the theory about Epstein is we know he filmed people for sure on that island. He has a lot of movies, a lot of films of people that are very, very powerful political figures, and entertainers, business people. So, do you really believe that Jeffrey Epstein himself? And
of course not.
Of course not.
Yeah.
The parallels with Epstein are impossible to ignore. Both men built empires on charm, access, and the illusion of endless luxury. Both were accused of constructing private worlds that sparkled on the surface but allegedly hid manipulation and exploitation underneath. Epstein had his mansions and island retreats. Diddy had his infamous freak-off parties. The decor may have differed, the music louder in one than the other, but the underlying suggestion was the same: control through indulgence. And in both cases, whispers of cameras linger, with files of encounters rumored to serve as leverage over powerful guests. Epstein's list never surfaced. Diddy's trial never produced one either. That silence, surrounding names too famous to name, now speaks louder than any witness ever could.
I don't know this, but it just seems very suspicious when you go through and you look at in the history of different people that can make you go away if you listen, I've worried about some of the things that I talk about on my
Consider the lost opportunity. If prosecutors had widened their scope, digging into guest lists, phone records, or hotel logs, who might have been exposed? Instead, the case was deliberately narrowed. Names never reached the courtroom, and once again the public is left to wonder. Is this about one man's collapse, or about an entire class of elites shielding one another? If Diddy truly knows more than he's revealed, who else could be implicated? Meanwhile, the headlines about legal maneuvering overshadow what's happening to Diddy himself. Imagine the psychological toll. A man who once commanded every room now faces a future where his movements are monitored, his choices second-guessed, his voice diminished. Some insiders even claim he is being gaslit into compliance, surrounded by handlers who dismiss his suspicions as madness while quietly dismantling his empire. In an environment where reality blurs and trust dissolves, even the most powerful figure would begin to unravel. And perhaps that unraveling is exactly the point.
That was all the people that went to the puffy parties. That was all the people that did all those things thinking that there was never going to be a consequence for what they were doing. Got punked out and pimped out by some greater desire. You shouldn't have a greater desire than being a man. So I believe that's a big problem with a lot of the actors out there because they get fluid. And next thing you know, once you go fluid.
The signs are already showing. Visitors describe Diddy shifting between bursts of defiance and long spells of confusion, boasting about comebacks one moment, then retreating into silence the next. Friends whisper he has grown deeply suspicious, convinced phones are tapped, cameras still recording, even his own children turned against him. To outsiders, it may sound like paranoia, but when the very system is moving to brand you unfit, paranoia begins to look like prophecy. If these accounts hold true, this saga is more than a legal battle. It is the story of a man undone by the empire he built.
I'm sorry, I'm just I'm in this moment right now. This is crazy. Sorry. People don't really know how much what it does to you when something that you love is taken from you and thrown away like it don't even matter, and then they move on with their lives and you're stuck. You're stuck. During those years, you're still stuck 21 years later.
There's a tragic symmetry in how this story unfolds. Fame built Diddy into someone who seemed untouchable, yet that same fame now makes him expendable. He has become a symbol rather than a man, and symbols are far easier to erase. To some, he embodies the darker undercurrents of hip-hop's golden age. To others, he is merely a pawn in a larger game where politics, celebrity, and justice collide. Either way, his legacy is being rewritten, not by his own voice, but by the forces moving around him. The stage feels like it's being deliberately cleared. Epstein was erased before he could testify in open court. Now Diddy is being shifted off the board before October arrives. Prosecutor Maureen Comey is suddenly fired. The Epstein files are locked down. Diddy's power is sterilized by psychiatric rulings. The coincidences are too many, the timing too neat. Are we witnessing justice, or a coordinated effort to shut the curtain on truths that threaten to expose far more than one man's sins?
Are you surprised by the evidence that's already coming out in the criminal trial?
No, I'm not surprised. I experienced some of those things. Witness violence.
Family is the thread that keeps circling back in Diddy's story, yet it's the part left most unexamined. While prosecutors, presidents, and industry players dominate the headlines, the quieter maneuvers inside his own household may prove the most decisive. His children, raised in the glare of cameras, have built careers as models, musicians, and influencers. Now, their father's collapse casts a shadow over everything they do. Each faces a difficult choice: distance themselves to protect their futures, or stand by a man many say is beyond redemption. Outwardly, they project loyalty, but insiders whisper that behind closed doors, plans are already being drawn to safeguard inheritances and secure independent legacies.
Let's talk about the filth that's starting to come out in the early days of the Diddy trial. This, of course, is P. Diddy. Surprise, surprise, he's a creep. Surprise, surprise, he's done hot.
The ex-partners, too, linger in this unfolding drama with an intensity that feels almost theatrical. These are women who once shared Diddy's spotlight, who bore witness to his private excesses, and who now stand at the edges as he sinks deeper into legal and psychological quicksand. Many have long pursued their own ventures, carving identities outside of his orbit, yet the possibility of gaining financial leverage through institutional rulings is impossible to ignore. Guardianship battles are hardly rare in the celebrity world, and whispers suggest the chance of a coordinated effort to ensure the most profitable branches of his empire eventually pass into their hands. In that sense, what may appear as caregiving could just as easily be long-term strategy. What makes this thread so devastating is how closely it mirrors the classic tragedies. A patriarch once untouchable, undone not by faceless rivals or strangers, but by those who once shared his home and intimacy. If the courts sever him from his billions, the primary beneficiaries are not nameless trustees or outside investors, but his own children and former partners. They stand to gain more from his silence than his words, more from his absence than his presence. Whether or not they orchestrated it, the optics alone twist the saga into a Shakespearean betrayal where love, loyalty, ambition, and greed become indistinguishable.
You are literally, it's an unhealthy space. And so eventually you're going to go too far, you know? Who knows what happened to Philip? Who knows what he had to do in order to get to where he was at? There's a lot of things that people do that end up sitting and they can't get over it. And they got to keep getting high, hoping to get it out of their head, you know?
We cannot ignore the emotional toll this must be taking on Diddy himself. To believe that your empire is collapsing under the weight of political vendettas is one thing. To suspect that your own bloodline is tightening the noose is another. Friends who have seen him up close say his paranoia now circles as much around family as federal investigators. He wonders which confidences have been betrayed, which whispered conversations behind closed doors have quietly paved the road toward his institutionalization. For a man who built his entire persona on never being alone, always surrounded by an entourage, the forced isolation must feel like a kind of psychological exile. The cruelest twist is that family betrayal feels both plausible and profitable. Public sympathy would naturally rally behind children who say they are protecting their father from himself. Former partners would be applauded for safeguarding shared legacies. And yet, the result could be a dynasty splintering into rival factions, each claiming their slice of wealth through trusts and estates. If this is indeed the path being carved, then Diddy's downfall is not only legal or financial, it is deeply personal. A collapse staged within his own household, while the world looks on from a distance.
I can't wait. I can't wait for everybody to find out what's really been going on in the back.
And so we're left with the real question. Is this true punishment, or a calculated power play to silence Diddy, erase his empire, and bury his secrets for good? Could what's happening now be only the prelude to revelations that reach far beyond hip-hop, shaking Hollywood and even Washington itself? The truth behind Diddy's downfall may be only the tip of a much larger iceberg. Until next time, stay sharp, stay curious, and remember, nothing in this world is ever as simple as it seems.